Okay, Dan.
All right. Welcome. What I thought I would do when I had considered doing a talk is my education has really been focused on and rounded around period furniture. It's not necessarily making reproductions. I don't make exact reproductions. I do use a lot of period pieces as influence. I use a lot of period work for inspiration. Most of my customers that I do commission work for tend to lean towards that type of style of woodworking. Haven't made a whole lot of modern interpretations of things. Usually it's to customize a specific style in a specific period that they'd like to fit their needs. That's what I do. I am a graduate of North Bennett Street School. I graduated in 1994. I went there when I was 18. North Bennett was my college, so I graduated when I was 20. I'll tell you how old I am now. I started teaching workshops, assisting workshops the summer of 94. Got into teaching shortly thereafter in 95. Taught winter chair making in Hampton. Mine for a while, about almost 6 years. And then I went back to teaching the full-time program in 2006. Took over as department head in 2010, and that's where it lands me today. But this year has been kind of a big move. We've all, so far, done pretty well with COVID, and this kind of prompted me to do my own thing, and it's been on my bucket list for a long time, so we took a space in the mill, and this is where we are today. So, what I did is I wanted to talk about the chair, and I call the elements of making a side chair just because this is what we're using as a vehicle. I really want to talk about chair construction and talk a little bit more about as you make the chair, as you build the chair, how do the curves relate to it? A lot of people look at Queen Anne chairs or Chippendale chairs, and they look at all of the shaping work or carving work and detail work. That, to me, if you know anything about wood carving, you've done any wood carving, you're going to carve a leaf. You don't carve the veins of the leaf on the raw wood, right? You shape the leaf and give it movement first. So what you need to do with the chair is you need to build the chair in blocks. Right? All the joinery is done with everything is flat and square, especially if you're using machinery. It's much easier to put something on a machine when it's flat and square. All of the shaping happens after the fact, right? So all of that. It doesn't matter what style chair it is. There's really only, in period chairs, there's two primary ways to build a chair. In the way that I think about it, when you're looking at kind of Georgian chairs, that kind of Queen Anne and Chippendale time period, you're building chairs kind of front to back. You build a back assembly, you build a front assembly, and you join them together. And then you have other chairs, as you're looking at more like Empire chairs, lyre back chairs, kind of the Duncan 5 time period. And actually, you're sitting in one of those types of chairs. It actually has a construction that's a side-to-side construction. You build two side frames, and it actually gets joined together side-to-side. Take a look at that chair later on as well. What's interesting about this, too, is you can take a traditional style chair, and you might have a customer, you might have a family member you're making a piece for that's not into traditional forms, but you can make a traditional build, and you can modernize this chair. And I actually have a chair in the office I'll pull out that is this chair with just tapered legs and tapered posts. But it has all of the curves for the back, for the smooth back of the Queen Anne chair. So all of the pieces that I build and all the things that I teach folks how to make will always begin with drawing. Right? So I have a draft of this chair. I don't even think it's complete. I think I was doing this as a demonstration, so it is missing a couple of the joints, a couple of the details. But basically, all of my drawings that I do are full size. I don't do any computer drawing, and that's partially by choice because I don't understand it. It's a little out of fear, and I have to learn something new. And I'm fast at this. I've been doing this for a really long time. But I like a full-size drawing because I can pull the patterns from it. When I've worked with others who actually draft on the computer and do it really well, for us to refine curves and do things, they need to print it out so we can actually refine shapes. It's hard for me to do, and it's hard for them to decipher what I'm trying to do on the computer. So all of these things would have a pattern. Right? So there's the front view, a side view, and a plan view. And when you're looking, if you're drawing the plans and you're trying to get all this stuff figured out, you need all three views kind of happening at the same time to figure out information. If you're actually buying plans, if you bought plans from Gene Landon, or somebody was telling me they bought some chair, it's going to be laid out in a similar way and it's going to have all the similar views. But when the person who's designing to make the build, they need some information. So to find out, like if you're looking at the side view and you're looking at the back post here, on that back post, you need to know how far this thing's going to lean back. You can't get that from front view. To know where the splat's going to be, because the splat and the post are not in the same plane, right? They're offset each other because of the curves. So I need to know where that is. So I need a plan view. That's a plan view of that crest rail joint. It shows me that's the tenons for the splat. There's the tenons for the post. So it tells me there's an offset. Right? This crest rail is going to curve and lay back. So for me to get this information inside view, I need this information here. So again, my point is you need to work around all three views simultaneously to figure out information and plug in the differences of where you are. And again, all the curves happen afterwards. When I start drawing this, you can see my lines. There's the lines and the size of the blank. I started to actually work to figure out the curves of the leg. It has to come out of the blank. And when you're designing any kind of furniture, you're going to design that within the wood that you can buy. Right? I could make up some kind of weird size of wood, but if I can't buy it, it becomes wasteful because I have to go next size up. I know cabriole legs come out of 12-quarter wood. Most legs, Queen Anne and Chippendale, it's hard to find something bigger than 2 3/4 is a pretty big blank. Sometimes they're a little heavier if it's a bigger piece, but if you're looking for something that's in kind of the chair or like a footstool or even a low boy or a high boy or something like that, they're all going to come out of 12-quarter. All going to probably be 2 3/4 is fairly big, 2 5/8. I think the coffee table I have, I think those are 2 5/8 blanks for those cloth feet. They might be 2 3/4, I forget, but this is a 2.5 inch. So it still has to come out of 12-quarter lumber. The other thing is, if I can, I want to try to get all of the pieces out of the same piece of wood. So even though the rails are going to finish out at 3/4, it's still going to come out of my 12-quarter wood. I'm doing that for color. Right? I want to try to get everything to kind of match. I want everything to be harmonious. If I have to make a set of chairs or multiple chairs, I might not be able to do that. I might have to say, okay, the 12-quarter will be for the legs, but back posts will come out of 8/4, 1.5 inch square, back here at the joints. But that 8-quarter board, that resaws nicely into 4-quarter. Right? So I can get my rails and things out of that. 12-quarter, it's a little more expensive, but it actually works out pretty well. On most chairs, the width of that rail fits in the thickness of the 12-quarter wood. Right? So process-wise and yield-wise, you can actually get a lot out of that board. The other thing I want to really kind of talk about before we do woodworking is what's probably more important on this type of work is when you choose the board, the grain orientation of the board, when you lay out your parts. When I look at rails, I like to have a nice straight grain. Visually, I think it's nice, but also I don't want a lot of run out of grain for the tenons. Right? There's not a lot of structure. You know, 2 tenons that come into the space, and if you think about sitting in the chair, there's a lot of force that happens within that chair. So it has to be a really strong building. But also, I'm thinking about what is the leg? What's going to happen? You don't always have the best choices. If you look at this back splat here, it has kind of an hourglass pattern to it. So it has like has a bullseye up above and has kind of an X pattern down below. So it actually kind of emphasizes the curve. It's because I chose that piece of wood. It shows how that's going to go. With the legs, the same thing. When I cut this one off, this leg's actually a little bit better. We'll talk about the grain orientation of the legs a little bit. I'm looking for, I have some options. How I saw saw the leg blanks out, and I start cutting into those curves, it's going to expose the grain. So if I'm going through something that's a flat sawn board, and I saw through the surface of it, right? What's going to happen? It's going to give me that kind of thing, either a bullseye, or it's going to give me kind of an X pattern. I think it has some samples I can show you.
Is that leg in the back glued up to get? You said it's an 8/4 leg in the back.
That's an 8/4 post in the back.
So is that that kind of bottom flare? Is that two boards joined together then?
No,
or is that...
it's 8/4 this way, so it's just a
gotcha,
wider line that way.
Gotcha.
So if you just take a look. Anyways, this is just 2x4 stock, right? But if you took a look at that 2x4, you said, okay, it's just a regular flat sawn board. And you can look at the end grain of it, you can see the pith of it, the growth rates of it. And how you saw into that face will give you a different look, depending on what face you saw into. So I think this one here, think about these two things. So this one here, it's the same kind of rough serpentine shape. This would be looking at the face of the board, would have been the outside, would have been the bark side of the board. This is the heart side of the board. When you saw into that pattern, it's giving us what we call X's and O's. Gives you an X pattern, gives you an O pattern. This one is opposite. It's showing you the heart side. So the same board, right, just flipped around, same 2x4. So now this gives me the O's, the bullseyes here, and the X's on the inside. So same thing, it depends on what surface you cut from. That's what happens with the Queen Anne chairs, right? And that's what happens when you saw into any type of shape. You want to think about that stuff. So if I don't want a really strong pattern, if I had this blank, right? We talked about the 8/4 thickness being this way. If that blank was going to be if it was an 8/4 blank, I think about this way. If it was a quarter sawn 8/4 blank, right? The grain going this way, so it means the face grain would have been here, and I saw into that curve, what would have happened? I would have had cathedrals. I would have had this kind of a pattern happening. It is distracting on the face of a post. So what we look for here and here, and it can help out some too, is we're looking for what we call rift sawn wood. Right? Rift sawn wood means you have diagonal grain. If I was to draw it really quickly here, you're looking at board, and this is going to be kind of key to our chair. Our perfect blank, if we can choose this, is basically grain that is diagonal. That's what we call rift. My chair board, and I'm usually looking for really common, roughly 8 to 10 inches wide for most chairs. And I'm looking for something that the grain can be fairly centered. I want some kind of a cathedral. I want some kind of a flat sawn pattern from it, right? So what happens is in that board, there's my splat wood. That's that flat sawn board I was looking for. And these rift ones are my posts and/or my legs. Okay? So if this is off center, it could actually lean one way or the other and throw something off. So trying to think about grain orientation is really important to me, and it's one of those details that gets missed a lot, for folks. So what I did yesterday, like I said, is I just wanted to kind of lay this out. This is a chair that I've had in parts. It was a workshop I had done a while ago. It's been sitting for probably 2 years in parts. But what I did, it's a little out of sequence, meaning that this is already all glued up. Normally, all of this work would have already been done. Right? So, order of business. Right? So, what's the procedure for building a chair? We're going to start with the back post. We're going to take those back posts. We're going to mill them to thickness. We're going to actually cut out. We're going to star out, and we're going to fair the shapes. It's going to be spoke shaved, it's going to be hand planed, it could be a rasp, it could be a file, it could be a card scraper, whatever you need to actually do that fairing work. Then we're going to cut mortises. Okay? So we're going to cut, and we're going to talk a little bit about that.
Do you find that there's any difference in strength of rift sawn versus board sawn, or are they comparable?
I think they're comparable as long as you don't have a lot of run out either way. So if the legs are going to be rift sawn, or ported this way, or flat sawn one way, or on the post. What I'm more concerned about, because this grain's fairly straight, and if you see, you start getting a little run out towards the top. You start getting a little run out towards the bottom. You can't avoid that, like unless you get a curved piece of wood that fits your shape, right? You don't want to bend these and not bend. If I had a board, if this board had a lot of run out this way, it wasn't really straight, it might make that better, but would make that weaker. Right? So I'm really looking for that nice straight grain to be within that blank in that direction if I can. So what we do is we take these posts and we mortise those posts, and we actually fit the back seat rail. Traditionally, these chairs are usually a two-piece back seat rail. It's a back seat rail, and then the shape on top, the shoe, is usually applied on top of that. And it's not uncommon for this to be a different wood, and it's not uncommon for that to be a different thickness. A chair, the Chippendale chair I did for the old State House in Boston, actually had a red oak back seat rail. It was veneered with mahogany on the outside, and it had a mahogany shoe cap on top. And that's common because they didn't want to. There's no real reason to waste that amount of primary wood if this was mahogany or a valuable wood. It wouldn't waste that for something that's unseen on the inside. It all gets covered by the upholstery. But what we do is we build what we call an H. So you build the H of the chair. Everything is still flat and square. There's no tapers on these posts. There's no shapes in the back. Then order of business. So you basically have a base, and this crest rail gets put on. So there's two tenons that come off the post into that crest rail. Basically, you're making a frame. Right? It's like building a frame and panel chest. You have to build the frame and fit the panel. All this is a curved panel. And we're going to take this blank, and we're going to connect this joint, which is a mortise tenon joint, down into the shoe, up to the crest rail. We're going to fit those two joints even before we cut and fair and shape all of this stuff. It might be roughly curved out because they don't want it to move a lot with wood movement issues, but there's flats, there's references that help you lay out and cut these joints. It doesn't matter if you're doing it all by machine or you're doing it by hand. You have to have flats, reference flats, to lay out the joinery and measure and cut and fit. So, but
Yeah, when you're doing your seats, do you ever miter the tenons?
in here,
Yeah.
I don't. I worry about my thought on that is if you connect the mortises, right? You've actually cut the leg. You've actually separated the fibers all the way through. So you have connecting wood up above and connecting wood down below. Depending on how much shaping is going to be here, you have a little bit more here with a trapezoid seat, but if you had a balloon seat, there's a lot less wood in there, and I'm worried about that being the weak point. If you see chairs that break, it's not the tenons that break, it's the legs, it's the posts. Because you have rabbets in the rails, you have a little bit of wood above where that tenon is, about 3/8 of an inch of wood there. And then if this takes any amount of stress, this isn't going to break. This is what's going to break. And typically, I don't have any glue blocks in here. I'll show you in the other chair when I pull it out. There are glue blocks that help reinforce this on the inside. So I wouldn't do it on a chair.
Do you have a draw board and or pin your...
I don't draw bore because it's dried. Pinning, I guess it would depend. If the customer likes a traditional look, I will. My thought on pinning for chairs, especially, if you think about it in the period, if they're making a set of chairs, right? They're 6, 8, 10, 12, and if you're working on all of these parts all at the same time, and you're trying to clamp off, it's a lot of clamps, it's a lot of that type of stuff. So what you could do is you could clamp this up. I could clamp this joint, I could glue it, I could pin it all the way through, and I could take that clamp off and keep working. And then I could do all this fitting, I could glue these joints, pin them, and I could take the clamps off. I could just keep going and keep moving. So I think of that nowadays as more decorative for people. I think they like the look of it. I think with modern glues it's maybe not as necessary. But also I would consider if your tenons get a little smaller, if you do pin them, it does weaken the tenon a little bit, right? Because you're adding structure that way for it not to come apart, but you're actually adding hole through the tenon and through the post, and it gives it actually a weak spot that if it does take a shock, if you hit this thing in here or knock that out, it could be an issue. So anyways, we would build the back of the chair. Then I would have to make some legs, right? But as I make my legs, I want to think about, and we're going to talk about this when I take this apart. On these legs, there's transition blocks on the side, right? So it's one piece of wood that goes all the way down, and then there's blocks on here that help you make a transition from a curved leg to a flat leg. Right? So we got these transition blocks. Typically, this is mahogany, this is walnut. I wouldn't do that. This is what I had when I did the demo. So anyways, what I really want is I want that transition block wood to be the same wood as the leg for the best possible match. So what happens, and we'll talk about that when the leg comes off, these two blocks originally were right there. So what happens is, as I start to cut the leg, if you are working with the table saw, holding small pieces is hard to do, right? Try squaring that up on your table saw. It's nerve, you wouldn't do it, right? So what I want to do is I can square the end. Well, this is one full length, I can cut off the block, square that end, cut off the block, make up my leg length. Okay. So it's a way to hold on to this safely without risk. If you're doing it with a handsaw or anything like that, I think I'd still do the same thing. I think I would square this up, handsaw up, square that up. Because I don't need this side to be square. So I think about how I would work it. So I'm going to shape a leg, or no, I'm going to have a square blank. I'm going to cut my mortises. I'm going to fit my tenons. Everything is fit square. All of this stuff is done square. Then I'm going to think about cutting transition blocks off. I'm going to saw out the leg blank. Then I'm going to fair my legs. If I have any shapes in the rails, I need to do all my detail work. There's rabbets in the rails for the seat frame to go into. But then all of that work is done, and we glue up the front assembly, and then we glue up the front side seat rail joint. So this is dry, right? This is fixed, so I can still work on this. If this had a lot of carving on it, the back and the front can be worked on and carved and all that stuff before this thing goes together. It's manageable. And I want to do all of this shaping work, all of this flushing to the post, and transition block when it's a unit. So, any questions before I take this thing apart?
Yeah. That joint of the side splat to the rear.
Yeah.
Those
Here?
complex angles.
Yeah.
And how do you go about, if you're doing 6 or 7 chairs, setting that up so you can repeat that? And not only that, so that it fits.
Yeah.
Talking from experience.
Yeah.
It fits.
Yeah. So, if you're making multiples of the chairs, hopefully all your setups are pretty consistent, right? So hopefully from chair 1 to chair 6, they should be fairly close. Maybe the length is a little different. Maybe you had trouble with one of the shoulders or something. But what we do is we can actually make a way to measure the angles. So I don't have it here. Let me draw it on the board, see if it makes any sense. So if I have this black here, this is the bottom. I'll try to draw it fairly big. This is the shoe. Right? There's a mortise in here. And then there's a crest rail up here somewhere. Like this. And there's a mortise somewhere here in space. Right? And specs, you have a fixed length. So what we do is we take a scrap piece of wood. It can be a piece of scrap pine. I use pine a lot just to have it around shop. I mill it to the finished thickness of my splat, which is about a ½ inch. And then I just cut a couple of rabbets on either end. This. Because those are the tenons. These tenons are bare facing the front, shouldered in the back. Up here, they're shouldered in the front, bare facing the back. So this tenon is like that. And this tenon is like that. So it's bare facing the front, shouldered in the back. Bare facing the back, shoulders in the front. So I take this block of wood, you cut it. So you have a stick here, a stick here. Push them down in there, you just connect it with a piece of plywood. So I just glue it there and glue it there. When I take that out, it is the physical length of the splat to the chair, and it gives me the setup of the angles.
I was talking more about the side rails.
Oh, here?
I misspoke, yeah.
That's easy. That's the hard part. That joint, it's not hard. But it's the last thing. If you miss the length of this, all of this work that you've done before is lost. The timing of it. Right? You can recover. But usually, when I've taught this in the workshop format, we spend, whatever, a whole day getting this joint fit nicely. We take the measurement. Somebody misses this joint, you just lost that whole day because you got to redo those joints. Because it's a length. It's a length issue. So that back joint, so I'll talk about that. So I'm going to take this apart. So anyways, just here on the setup, like I said, I glued these up last night before I left the shop. These are bed springs. So you take an upholstery spring. It's a little heavier. Right? But if you have an old mattress, or somebody throwing away an old mattress, cut the springs out. And then you can just cut it off of there. So with a cut off wheel and just sharpen the points. What's nice about them is they're flexible. So if you want to make it a little tighter, you pinch that in so you have a little tighter cut. You can open them up so you have a little less form on. So it's a good adjustable way to clamp things. And if you have good fitting joints, it could just be a rub joint and walk away. I usually rub joint these in and pinch them on there just so they can't slide. And that's all you need to be able to do. So bed springs are really, really helpful. And they're cheap. All right, let's see. Let's see what I think. So the two ways to think about building chairs. And this has been, if you want to call it a debate, call it a debate. I've had a lot of conversations with the folks at Colonial Williamsburg. Do you do angled tenons? Do you do straight angled mortises? Right? It's a traditional way to do things or not. And we got a visit at school from Corey Lafon, who was the journeyman and then the master cabinet maker in the Williamsburg shop. And he's like, I just got to ask, it's been debated forever. Why do you tend to do a lot of angled tenons and straight mortises, where traditionally they're angled mortises and straight tenons? The major reason most people in the modern day do that is it sets up better for machinery. Machines like to cut square, right? It's easy to cut a square mortise. It's easy to cut an angled tenon. You tip your tables off. It's convenient, right? When you do that, there's reasons to do it. There's some convenience factors to it. When you think about pure strength of the joints and things like that, then you got to consider some different things. So this chair is actually a traditional build. This is an angled mortise straight tenon chair. And I do have, let me open this up too. I brought some other little parts that I have. While I'm doing this, I just have some books you can look at later on. These are just some chair books, some traditional books you can take a look at for chairs. So this is, take a look at this rail, and I'll pass this stuff around. So that rail is for a balloon seat. It's actually like that, balloon seat, Queen Anne chair. So it's curved outside, and we'll have a curved rail at the top, curved rabbet for a seat. But this chair has it has an angled tenon. The tenon is in this chair, and I pull it back. You'll see the tenon is in line with the black. Right? So what does that mean? What's the difference? So I started doing this more traditional build after I did the chair that I made for the old steakhouse, the Chippendale chair there. I took it. The project wasn't to do an exact reproduction as far as the process, but I took it upon myself. I wanted to make the build and do the build exactly like it would have been built in the 1760s. So cut all the mortises, sawed out all the shapes with fret saw, did everything by hand. And it was the first time I had done this. I'd done straight tenons and not angled tenons. This wasn't the way that I'd done it before. So let me take this apart. So you see that side recipe. This has angled shoulders, straight tenon. The one that's going around has a angled shoulder, angled tenon in the angled shoulder, but if you notice, the tenon and the shoulder are square to each other. Right? That's the main difference. Pass that one around. What does this do? If you think about, it'd be easier to see the whiteboard now. as you design your woodwork, your furniture, if you're doing furniture, whatever, you're always trying to design the joinery. You're trying to figure out to what extent can you add strength, or can you actually weaken the joint? So what typically will happen, let me draw back post, right? That's what we're talking about. This is the back post. On that chair, at the joints, it's 1.5 inches square. There's a back seat rail that is 1.5 inches thick, right? This is looking down at the plan view of it. And in this chair, this is 1.5 inches thick, there is a 1/2 inch thick tenon in the back. Right? So it is centered, so you have a 1/2 inch shoulder, 1/2 inch shoulder, 1/2 inch tenon. And then you have to make your choice. What type of joint are you going to do for there? Right? So the question is, angled or straight? So what happens with the angled tenon? Let's do that in a different color. Angled tenon. So angled tenon, you need to have a certain amount. You want as much wood on the outside. General rule of thumb for mortise and tenon joints, whatever the thickness of your tenon is, you have to have at least that amount of a shoulder on the outside or greater. So if you have a 3/8 thick tenon, I want at least 3/8 of wood on the outside. Sometimes you make some sacrifices if you need to, but generally, whatever this dimension is, it's at least equal to what your tenon is. So if this is a 3/4 thick rail, we're going to do a straight tenon. I'm going to do this as a through joint. It's a stronger, more glue surface, and I can wet it from the back. And then this is the back seat rail once it's that 1/2 inch one. So what this allows me to do, and I don't want those to connect. If I connect those, I'm going to weaken that post a lot. So one advantage to this joint is it allows me to get a little bit longer tenon. If I do the straight tenon, it makes the wood on the outside of the post a lot thicker, a lot stronger. So it gives me strength out here, but it makes me have to shorten this tenon up a little bit so I don't have those connect. I want at least 1/8 of an inch of wood between there. Sounds like it's splitting hairs, but when you think about when you angle the tenon, you're actually bisecting the grain pattern too, right? So you have the grain, when you cut something at an angle, you have short grain issues. So typically what we'll do, if we're going to angle a tenon, we're going to make the tenon thicker to help compensate the strength. So in a chair build, with a straight tenon, angled shoulders, I can get away with a 5/16 tenon. I'm going to go angled tenon, I'm going to beat that up to 3/8 of an inch thick. And it's going to sacrifice a little bit of what's going on inside. So I have to have 3/8 in here, 3/8 of tenon to help compensate the short grain issues of it. And it's going to sacrifice that back tenon a little bit. Again, it's so minor if you're good about choosing your lumber. Right? If you're choosing good straight grain wood, it's pretty minimal. But these are the two major arguments of how to do that in the why. The modern cabinet maker has all the machinery. It's more efficient, maybe a little easier to do. But all of these joints were cut on the table saw. All of this stuff is done right off the saw. So it's really easy to cut a straight vertical tenon. It's not too hard to cut a shoulder either. So if you have any questions on that, but that's...
So can you speak to the front joint? So I did a compass shaped one.
Yep.
And was concerned that straight tenons, because of the shaping of the front leg,
Yeah.
there might not be enough room there. Or at least I'd have to have a shorter tenon to make sure that I didn't curve.
Yeah.
And so the trade-offs, I ended up doing an angled tenon.
And then in that joint, it might actually be worth doing it the other way. If I had a chair with stretchers, sometimes it's easier because the mortiser likes to cut things square. It's easy to cut a through tenon on the mortiser really easily because I can actually put this down on the mortiser like that. It's pretty easy to tip it and cut my angle mortise. That's an easy thing to do. If I was going to do a stretcher, it's harder to do. It's harder to do because I'd have to get this in the mortiser. If it's just a 90-degree one, I can just cut it 90 degrees. If I need to tip it, now I have to tip it and mount the curve. So it ends up being some kind of a balance. I think, honestly, it's not as practical. It would be better to do a straight tenon in the back and angled in the front, because I think it would give you better strength front and back. I've thought about that in different ways. And then the front, so usually, this is kind of jumping around a little bit, usually we fit these back joints first, and then we'll fit the front joints here, and we leave that front rail as the last thing we fit. Why? Every joint is flat and straight and square. Everything's 90 degrees up here. I can do that easily. I can take a measurement, and I can fit this thing in here and not have to worry about the angle problems. So I have these are fit dry, and I can take a length and fit that thing in there last. So I'm going to pass that around while we talk about other things. So get these out there. So this kind of shows you what this slat looks like. It's got a couple of tenons, on the bottom, bare face on the bottom, front, bare face on the back. These are extra parts that have been kicking around for quite a long time. Let's see. So that's kind of the build. What I thought I would do is do a little woodwork.
Plenty of time.
It's good.
Yeah, you let me know when you want to take a break, but we're good.
I can just keep rambling. If I ramble, just tell me to move on. So, 'cause I can do that. Like these. But these are really nice books. You can find. I can appreciate a lot of the online catalogs now, because most of the museums have digital images, really great images. You can get close-ups of details. They're really, really helpful. I like spending time with a book when I'm designing. I go back and forth to it easily. I don't have to sit at the computer. And books are cheap. This is depends on your book.
Some of those books are $500.
Are they?
They're out of print. It's a museum book.
John Kirk, American Chairs, Queen Anne Chippendale Period. What I like about this, just talks about the different styles, and it gives you some regional differences. So it has Massachusetts, New York, Philadelphia, things like that, and it shows you some of the variations of some of the designs. One of the other things about books, too, is you have an older book, they're dated, and a lot of the research has changed. So some of the books that call some of the Queen Anne chairs New York, they're Boston chairs, so anyways, so that stuff is. But what I usually do is I flip through a lot of the references I have, and if I notice it's in a collection, then I can go do a little bit more research, and I can pinpoint. I can say, okay, that's at the Met. And I can go to the Met, I can put in the accession number, and pull up whatever details I can get out of it. So anyways, I have a lot of books. The books I have over here are just like extras that I used to keep at school. It's not even a fraction of what I have at home. So, let's see. So before we talk about legs, let's talk about the back. So before this would have been glued up, what would I have done? Right? So I would have cut the mortises, like I said. I would have did the shaping here. I would have faired my S-curve. I would have joined this. I have to do all of this work to the back seat rail. Right? I have to cut the shoe. Got to cut the molding on the shoe. Got to cut the mortise. Got to fit the tenons. All of this work has to be done before this is glued up as a unit. So do all that work. You could do this typically if it's a workshop, if it's a machine-based workshop, we'll cove cut this on the table somewhere. It's typical. If we're going to do it by hand, I'll shoot it with a molding plane. If it's a machine-based thing, I can cut that thumbnail on the router table, okay? Or I could run it again with a molding or a scratch stop. Then I'm going to cut the upper part of the post. So I should have mentioned this in the beginning. The Queen Anne chair, or this style of chair, earlier than the Gange chairs, they're kind of pre-Queen Anne style, they have parallel posts. So it means that these posts are 90 degrees to the floor. This is a 90-degree joint. Okay? When you get into the Chippendale period is when the posts start canting, and that becomes an angle joint. So you have parallel post chairs and canted post chairs. So anyways, the parallel post chair. So the whole outside of it, you put a straight edge on this. This is flat all the way up to here. There's a little bit of a curve at the top just to be able to make this shape, but it's dead flat on the outside. flat on the bottom. It just has some chamfers down here for detail, and it has a taper on the inside to thin out the look of that. And because these are riffs on posts, and I don't have the cathedrals, I have a little bit of lean from the grain, and I chose for this to lean in because it picks up on that shape. If it was a Chippendale chair where they flare out, I might have reversed these posts, the grain would flare out and actually help the look of the chair. What else? Let's see. So I worked this, like I said, I would do the tapers, and I could do some chamfering or shaping if this had more shaping. If it was more transitional from Queen Anne to Chippendale or Chippendale, the backs of these would be fully rounded, D-shaped. Out here they're chamfered. This chair here is actually based off of one. We have some tracings that were actually given to us by a restorer down in Boston, and the posts and the splat and the crest rail of this chair were traced off a 1750s Queen Anne balloon seat Massachusetts chair, and it got modified. The width, the 15-inch back, is really typical to that time frame. So the back of the chair is really pretty closely based on that original, and the front we decided not to. There's a lot of balloon seat chairs that happen in that time period, but there are just trapezoidal chairs like what this one is with a straight rail. Okay.
When you're fairing those posts, do
Yeah.
you use like a dial caliper or just your eye?
When I fair those posts, I do them together. So what I do is I take those two posts, saw them out, bandsaw them out, and I actually take them and I put them together. I clamp them together, or sometimes I like a nail them together at the top so they're in unit. And then when I fair them, I'm fairing to a line the best that I can, but no matter what I do, they're identical to each other. So they match. I don't really worry too much. If I was making an exact copy, I would probably try to hit some points. But really what you're looking for in curved work is, you hear the term a lot, fair curves, right? What's a fair curve? Is you want something to have a smooth transition without any kind of kink, flat, bump. And as I'm doing those things, and even if I'm making patterns, as I shape this stuff, if I was shaping this here, the post here, I'd spoke shape this, and I could feel it pretty good. At some point, you can only do so well with your hands. You do really well with your hands, and I actually don't even look at it. I'm doing that with my hands to feel it. But then at some point, I actually put it up. What I can do is your eye, when you look along the curve, will find any flats or dips or bumps really, really quickly. And we'll do that when we do the cabriolet. I'll show you how to sight that work. So I try to sight those curves. But basically, this chair is at the point that the posts are pretty much done up to about here. The splat's pretty much done up to about here. And if you look at this side of the chair, that transition has been faired nicely. This has been faired nicely. This is not. This is all left heavy because this work needs to be done after it's glued together. It's much easier to get the shapes nice and the shapes fair. And how you decide to do that's up to you. I would do this work with a rasp. It's really hard to get in there with the spoke shapes. Too tight of a curve. It's not worth trying to get in there with anything like that. Your rasp is your friend there. You could do this vertical. You could put this in the vise. If you do it like that, you go vertical. You get a lot of vibration, but I like to be able to sight it this way. You could put it down like this and try to clamp it down and work this way. If I have a lot of work to do and I'm trying to be aggressive, I might be vertical with it or horizontal, but as I'm refining, I'm probably going to put that in the vise. Something like that. I can get in here with the rasp and work with the rasp here. Like I usually do this on another vise because you get limited by these benches sometimes with what they can do. So basically, you do need glasses. Bear this stuff up. So on the front, I have a little bit of my pattern that I traced there from before. And this is a Nicholson 49 rasp. Could be whatever rasp you like. And I try to be really fussy about this work. As you're doing shaping work, if you have any type of carving or any type of shaping that happens to occur, the end result can only be as good as your fairing work. So if the fairing's really good, whatever you're doing to the surface will be better. If you go on that, like when we do the caviar leg, if you just start shaping the leg off the bandsaw surface, it's a lot harder to do really well. You end up doing a lot of fussing at the end that's unnecessary. So usually what I'll do is I'll fair both of these so they look pretty good. Then I'll actually take it out, I'll put it on the floor, and I stand behind it. Sometimes I put a piece of poster board behind it. What I'm looking for, not so much with this curve, I'm looking at the negative shapes. Right, your eye picks up the negative shape here more than it does these positive shapes, these solid pieces. That negative shape is really kind of where I want to be fussy or fussier. Let me do a little bit. We can chamfer that post a little bit, and I want to do a little bit of shaping here too. So right here, it's quite heavy. I have my pattern inside of here. I could put this down and be a little bit more aggressive. I can be pretty aggressive with the rasp. Don't be bashful with the rasp. The rasp doesn't care about grain direction. Right? If I picked up a carving tool, I could do this with a carving tool and mallet pretty quickly too. But then the cutting edge, I have to worry about grain direction. Here, I can just blast away with the grain, against the grain, across the grain. I have a pencil line that's from the pattern. I hit my pattern pretty good. If you were concerned about that, you could take a measurement here and here. Design-wise, what's common on chairs is wherever this kind of bottlenecks down to, this width and this width are fairly typically the same on Queen Anne's and on Chippendales. That top change kind of reflects it. Not always. I mean, you can find variation. If you can think about it, whether it's good, bad, or ugly, you'll find it in old furniture. So here's some really beautiful stuff and some really hideous stuff. So I'm not going to take it all the way, one for time, but two, I want you to see it later on too. You can come up and you can take a look at these things and you can see how fussy you need to be. If you look at that, just kind of quickly from a distance, right? Here's the one I faired. It's nice and circular. The shape comes around. There's no humps or bumps. Look at this shape. It's a little bit flat up here. There's some dips and some other things going on.
After the rasp, what do you use to finish it?
It would depend, I guess, on how much of this is going to remain. I would probably take the file, get rid of these rasp marks, and then I'm going to take the card scraper and finish up inside of here. This chamfer is going to go up and shape around and take a lot of that away. So I'll probably file it. I'll probably chamfer it. Then I would scrape it with the card scraper.
You use like that middle piece too, the chamfer on the back of that middle piece?
Yeah,
all done
up there.
like
Yeah,
that?
all that will be done. So
Yeah.
let's see if we can set this up in a way. I was trying to mock this up yesterday in a way I could do this. It's not always the way that I do it, but I want it so it's easier so y'all don't have to keep moving around. Let's do it. I'm going to maybe do the chamfers up here.
Dan,
Yeah.
since you do a lot of period drapes, so they have a particular
Um,
or you just use standard?
I guess it depends on the shape. Yeah. If it's necessary to shape something, definitely. So I have tons of card scrapers of all different shapes and whatnot. Probably going to set this up like this.
What kind of glue do you use?
Depends on what I just use regular old Typon often. I use high glue. I haven't really got very much into the Typon 2s and 3s and whatnot. I just use regular standard yellow glue Typon. Actually, when I do things like Windsor chairs, I use white glue a lot. I use high glue It's just not as convenient for me. I don't do it quite as much. That'll be all right. I was talking to Al the other day about convenience. Is that when we were talking about the pre-mixed high glue, and I messed around with it a little bit. We do use it in some workshops that we do. One tip I learned from Curtis Buchanan, the Windsor chairmaker, is because he doesn't use it a lot. What he does is he makes a batch of high glue and he pours them in ice cube trays, silicone ice cube trays. Puts them in the fridge. It basically makes little individual servings. So when he has to do glue for a chair, he pops it in the glue pot. And he can do it without having to make a whole batch of glue. It's a pretty good tip. Smart, right? All right. So here, this is the side that was complete. That was the one? No, this is the side that was complete. Darn. Oh well. That's okay. I'm going to do this back chamfer. I'll just do it here. So what happens is this chamfer is going to come up. I use my finger. It's going to finger gauge it right around. Like that. This outside one's going to come up. Basically, it's going to peter out to that corner. And there's all different, like I said, all different types of shaping you can do. It's really typical on the queen ends. These chamfers are just 45 degrees. There's no magical cuts to the queen anne stuff. So let's just come around the corner. This one here is going to come up. Around the corner. It's going to peter out. And I'm going to show you the front. We've got to shape that front of it. This whole top of the crest rail curves towards the back. This is what's going to happen. I'm going to. If I was doing this for real, I'd have to turn this around so I'd be on this side of it. I'm going to do it so hopefully you and the camera can see what's going to happen inside of here. So I've got my rasp, my file, and hopefully my chisel.
How long did it take you to learn to draw ambidextrous?
I'm still learning. It's like all woodwork. The first thing you got to do when you put it to any type of cutting edge, find the grain direction. So if you're not sure, you can do a little test. I know I'm looking at the grain here. This is downhill. This is downhill. I'm not sure what's going on. This should be downhill this way, but there's going to be some sort of transition. If you're not sure, just do light cuts and test light. I can get to about there before that grain changes. This at that joint, there's two different directions going on. There's this way. There's this way. I'm going to see if I can get one to work with the other. Right there's going to be a change, so I can put a stop cut. The better you can get with the edge tools, the less rasp and file and scraping work we'll have to do later. Watch that. Grain's not going to like that. I'm going to take it up there first. So I'm using a 1-inch chisel. It's probably one of my favorite tools. I like it because it has a good broad surface. I can use just a corner of it and get some good reference. Grain change right there.
It's got a long handle.
I like it. Actually, what I've learned, and you'll see when I shape the cabriolet, I use my body a lot. I move a lot with it. I like to have it. It's not for leverage. I'm not really lying. I just like to control it. I could use a short-handled one as well. It's just,
It almost looks like a pair of chisels.
it is. It's a Witherby chisel that I bought a long time ago, and I really liked it for this operation. It's one of my favorite chisels to do. It's a Witherby is the brand. There's a challenge. So again, if I was on the other side of this thing, I would just change my body position and get over there. Again, if you're digging a hole, you're finding that transition too hard, stop, pick up the file, pick up the rasp. If you keep digging, you're not going to dig yourself out of that hole. It gets really bad really fast. And this kind of work is my favorite. I love shaping, love carving. Up here, same thing. Grain's going to come down. It should be able to hopefully run all the way down here. I'm going to watch that grain change there. I'm going to do a little like that. See, it doesn't like it? It's going to if I can do that, see how it's tearing? Don't want to do that. Stop. Let yourself come the other way. It's a little awkward leaning over this, but it's all right.
You have a reference line?
Yeah, I have a line here and a line there as well. Yep. And this line at the top tapers up to this little horn that's there. So I use this bevel slide down a lot. This is something. Here it's hard to do the inside curve, right? Because of the flat chisel. This allows me to spin this in. On this outside curve, I can flip this over. Or when I'm just wasting things away, I kind of use it like this. It gets me out of the cut pretty quickly. Phil used to call this shoveling off the wood.
How often do you sharpen that chisel?
Mine's dull. That was a wise guy thing to say, but no, if it's not cutting the way I want it to, it's time to stop. Can't see it all the way, but that's going to be good enough for now. So again, I have a little transition point. I'd like to fuss a little bit more, but that's where either the rasp or the file would come into play. Right? I have a little bit more control to come in here and just work that grain and finesse that grain. So you don't need to watch me do those types of things, but let's pop that out and see what's going on. So anyways, I've had this bench for a really long time, and people have asked me about the bench dog holes. What? I drill them when I need them, and it works really well. As I started using, if you haven't used holdfast a lot, you don't know what you need it for. And again, it seems a little like, boy, I can't believe I'm drilling it into my bench, but it makes it so you don't need to clamp this stuff down as often. So you drill a hole like these are set up for dovetails or shaping these chair parts, whatever it might be. It's just they're random. They're randomly on purpose. So basically, you can see what we did there. So we did a little shaping, took that chamfer up. This chamfer comes up around and hits that point. Right? So the front of this, what happens is you've got a lot of thickness here. And on these chairs, these posts come up, and then they curve down, but also they like to flare back. They like to thin this front edge quite a bit. But I have to worry about, there is a tenon. It's a half-inch long tenon that goes up inside of here. I can't hit that point. So I know somewhere inside of here there's going to be a joint. It's kind of a don't go past line here. But I can pull this back. So it's there are chairs that have a pretty large flat on the top. Some of the Massachusetts ones I've seen are 1/4 or 3/8 thick. I like to make them a little bit thinner. I might make this 3/16 or something. Doesn't really matter too much. This is whatever is going to look nice. But what I'm going to do, and I'll do this over here after I do it right at the end, is I'm going to take somewhere from around that joint to that top, and I'm going to peel this thing back. So it looks like this splat, which is curved this way, but it's flat. It's dead flat this way. It's going to come and looks like it rolls right off the top. Right? So we're going to come right to the end here, hopefully, and see if we can set this up. Should we do it that way? Yeah, why not? Really lay into that, I think. Let's see.
Are the horns staying full thickness?
No, that's going to go down too. So this whole thing's going to peel back, and then this curve is actually going to curve right up to the horn there. So this is going to have an OG shape on the top as well. So we relieve this and fare that down. Let's see if we can do that.
Let's use a grinder for that, huh?
A what? It's really quick with the hand tool. rasp. Use the chisel to start. I need the scope shave. Scraper.
I got it right there.
No, you're good. All right. Start taking some wood off of here. Make this a little harder. That grain change is going to be in here somewhere. And I'm not going to go all the way over because I'm not going to block the camera, but give it like that. It's just wood. Don't worry about it.
Don't worry about the camera, Dan. Wherever you want, I'll just move the camera.
All right. See what I mean about this chisel? I just kind of get it with my body.
Yeah.
Just kind of length of the chisel. It's nice.
Elliot, you get a real close up with this? Pretty close up.
Did you want to operate the camera?
No, you don't want to do that.
So like what I don't want to do is I don't want to have it just come out and look like it was just run with a router. I really want to make this look like it fares out. Not that the router wouldn't look nice. Okay, so I would have did a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit here, a little bit there. But it's nice to see it as you come up and look at this stuff a little later on. You can kind of see where it started and where it's going. But see that pretty quickly just with the 1-inch chisel. I don't know if you want to take a look or anything like that, but you can see that curve on the side naturally happens, right? Now I'm going to run the scope shave down there. So what I want to do now that I've got
I know.
this looks like that it flows right down, I want to make this post, I need to look at the transitions right down. So I use the scope shave, the grains work in here. That's actually not too bad off the tool. I don't think I have to do. I probably wouldn't even take the rasp to that. I'd probably take the card scraper to that. If you feel it later on, there's some ridges in it and stuff. But not so much. I want to. If I put rasp marks in it, it's aggressive enough. I'm going to have to get rid of them. So it's not worth chasing it. So let me just pull that up so you can see.
You basically do everything you can do to avoid sanding.
Yeah. Yes, I do. Here, I'm going to work on the legs next. If you guys want, I know it's a little hard to pass around, but that's where I'll start. So again, we shape the back, right? So the back is a unit. If this had carving on it, that shaping would have happened. If it had a shell, I would have had to leave some wood for the shell to be carved in there, right? I would have had to work around it a little bit more. There are some other chairs that might have a bead detail that goes up and around. Some of the early Gange chairs, there's kind of beads that go up the post and go into the crest rail. So,
Dan,
yeah.
it's been a little over an hour now. You want to just take a break? Can you go to the restroom and we'll come back? All right, good.
all right. So we're going to talk about the legs next. I wanted to show you this. That's a Queen Anne chair. It's exactly the same chair. Same dimensions, same angles, same everything. Same back shapes, tapered legs, tapered posts, everything is flat. It's more of a kind of a modern interpretation. But basically, what's nice about the traditional form and the structure, you can design around it any way you want. Right? But I wanted to pull this one at once so you can see that it is an identical width, 15-inch wide back. The height might be a little different depending on the shape of the horns and stuff, but it is the same chair.
So this is your modernized version.
It's the modernized version. Yeah. But the build is the same. I wanted to show you that one for the design, but also, like I said, I chose the same grain patterns. Right? So riffs on legs, like we're going to talk about with the cabriole legs, because it gives me a consistent grain pattern on the legs. I've got kind of that straight grain on the posts. I have a little bit of that lean the grain from the rifts on there, the flats on both sides, the X's and O's. When I've made some of these, I've played around with some of the different shapes that these have a curve. And this one here, I haven't done anything to the crest rail. Sometimes I leave the crest rail a little thicker so I can curve the top shape, or just gives a little bit of a different flair to it. Or sometimes I curve this a little bit on the outside or the inside. When it comes to any of these chairs, traditionally too, it usually has some kind of reinforcing glue block on the inside. So you can see glue blocks, your pine glue blocks in here. The way that I learned how to do glue blocks and the way that I still do them is more of the way that the English cabinet makers do, where they do the glue blocks are vertical grain, so they're vertical grain this way, where the American makers would have them so they fit across grain would be fitting this way. And a lot of the times when the grain goes across this way, they're going to cut the angles on them to fit. You have more of an end grain to face grain glue surface. A lot of times they're nailed in, they're glued and nailed. But this, what's nice about the vertical is you're getting face grain to face grain. Even though it is a conflict of interest because the grain's going different ways, it's such a small part, there's no stanchion issues. It's easy to get them in there. The front, it's done in two pieces. So you can actually get the front one in, flush it off, and fit the block afterwards. You don't have to fit the weird corner. And the back is just a single one. So these get glued in first. This gets glued in the back. But it's just a way to strengthen the joint. It's all covered by the seat, right? You'll never see it. But it adds a lot of reinforcement to the structure of the chair. So having glue blocks is really typical. They're always secondary wood. The one reproduction ones that I've done, I've seen pine, I've seen elm, I've seen oak, I've seen all different, woods in it. Yeah.
Any advantage, in your opinion, to screwing or not screwing the glue blocks in after you?
If you go vertical, there's no reason to screw them in there because it's face grain to face grain. If you go horizontal, you go across, and you have that kind of an end grain miter joint to it. I'm a little worried about the glue surface long term. So I would at least nail those on, but I would probably screw them on. The ones I did for the State House, they were glued and screwed on. All right, so that's, just wanted to share that with you. So the cabriolet, we'll do some shaping on that. We'll talk about the transition blocks. The other thing I wanted to show is usually when people do demonstration of cabriolet legs, they show you the fun part, like the shaping, what we're going to do, because it's cool. They don't show you the hard, weird, kind of fussy transition part. Now I want to show you this. This is where it matters, and this is where you can kind of make some mistakes. And so I want to show you how to get this stuff fair and how that all comes together, what's important. So I want to do this as well. So let's keep an eye on the time to make sure I don't spend too much time on one that I can't do on the other. So when you're laying out your parts and you're trying to figure out, your grain orientation, you're trying to figure all the stuff out. And we talked about, you can't say, well, actually the outside ones, right? Those rifts on blanks that we were talking about. I'm going to try to choose those for, what is the orientation of the blank. If I was to I'll try to do it here. So if I was going to choose this, I could take a look at the grain. I don't know if you can see that from where you are, but it's not perfectly diagonal grain, right? If the blank is large enough and a 12-quarter blank and the leg is small enough, I'll actually correct the blank within that 12-quarter blank. I can redirect the growth rings a little bit. I can do some finessing on that. But it ends up being whatever corner you're going to choose as your inside corner and outside corner is going to give you a certain appearance. And what I try to do is, if I have something that's not perfectly rift sewn, and this is not, I try to get it so those growth rings come through the face. So this one comes through the face really nicely, as if it was a 45 degree. Not so nice over here. So this becomes the inside. And this is not quite as good over here. Comes through the corner pretty good. There's a little bit of a flat zone. It's not perfect. But if I can choose, like this could be, if I'm sitting in the chair, right, if I'm sitting in the chair, maybe this is the left-hand block. And the right-hand one could be different. Whatever blank is going to orientate itself better So when you're looking at the front of the chair, the growth, why does this matter? If you choose, like I said, I like it so the growth rings are coming through the outside faces. That's giving us what we call flow lines. It's going to give us a pattern that when you're looking at it on a blank, it just looks like straight grain. Right? When you saw into that, you look at that, right? That grain actually looks like it curves. It looks like it curves because you're sawing into it with the shape. You're just looking at the end grain of the growth rings, and it will follow whatever shape you do. This blank wasn't as nice of a rift-sawn blank, so if you look at this side of it, you'll actually see a bullseye. What I don't like about this, so I chose the best face. This is what the board gave me. This is my only option, so I put the better face towards the front, and I put the not so nice face on the side. Sometimes you might want that bullseye pattern on the front, right? So you'll see cabriolets will have that bullseye shape right on the knee. I think that looks really nice. If you have a carved shell, it actually emphasizes the shapes of the shell. It gives you a really nice pattern. What I don't like about it is that if you don't hit the bullseye right on the knee, it looks like you missed. It looks like you made a mistake. So that bothers me a lot. It really does. But I didn't have a choice. But I wasn't trying to hit it on center. It's just what I had for wood. I think this one came out a lot better. But just take a look at those. But that's just, so the blank is the same for what we're calling flow lines or bullseyes. So if you have a really nice blank, let's say you have a really nice 45-degree grain, if I choose either this corner or this corner, let's say this one, as my inside corner for my joinery, when the grain's coming out the faces, that's going to give me the flow lines. If I choose that corner, when I saw into these faces, I'm sawing into the growth rings on the flats on the face, that's going to give me bullseyes. So same blank will give you two different patterns of what things look like.
So how well can you predict where the bullseye is going to fall based on the direction of the
If you have a really nice blank that's pretty consistent top to bottom, you can predict it pretty well.
Yeah.
But usually what's happening up here and down here aren't very consistent. Or if I'm really trying to hit the bullseye, the better end is going to go towards the top. So I don't really care what happens too much at the foot. So the other thing is, like I said, we're trying to keep track. We're trying to make sure our wood, to get the best possible matches, to make things look like, not like that, where this is walnut and mahogany. If you have the same wood, choose a different piece of wood, doesn't have the same grain pattern, it can look as bad. Right? So if you have this really nice grain here and then have cathedrals over here, it just looks like you made a mistake. So what I do, before these things, like I said, before these blocks get cut off of here, what also happens, especially if you're just kind of plucking away, like I said, I haven't touched this chair in almost 2 years, until yesterday. So these blocks have been kicking around for 2 years. Which ones went to which leg? Neither one of they're not sawn out. Those ones weren't sawn out. Because of my layout, I could put them right back together within minutes. So if you look at this, there's some lines that go up in here. So what I usually do is I take my blank right before anything's cut apart, and I just take a straight edge of some sort. I don't have a straight edge here. A pencil. And this was leg number 2, and the other one was leg number 1. What I do is I just come in here and I draw one line and 2 lines. And I do it on both corners. So what does that do? It tells me it's leg number 2 because it's 2 lines, and because I did them at an angle and they're pointing up. So I know what block was on top, I know what's the inside corner, and I know what leg it came from. Leg number 2, block number 1, block number 2. Very easy for me to put it back together. So when I cut these things off and put them aside until I get to them 2 years later, I can put it back. So you want to check out this. It's really simple markings. And I like to try to keep things as simple for layout as I can. So, as far as the band sawing, so the pattern that you would use, you have pattern. This is not the pattern for this leg. It's the one I used because I couldn't find my other one, but it's good enough. The way that if if you've done work that's kind of compound curved, it means it's cut, it's sawn out in 2 views, right? If you saw it out in 1 view, you would only have the one shape, and it would still have the full thickness this way. So the way that I do this is I take my pattern, I use my inside corner as my reference corner, trace this pattern on here, and then it's going to rotate right around the way, so it's booked. The pattern goes around the corner like so. And then when I bandsaw out one face. Let's see if we can, I don't remember the order of business that I did this one, but let's see if we can cut it apart in a meaningful way here.
So this bandsaw do you typically use for? I mean, what size blade? You know, is it like
A 1/4 inch will make this curve without a stop cut. So basically, let's see. I have everything taped up here, so I could have the blank for the gist of it. But basically, this thing gets bandsawn apart. So cut number 1 is basically this. This comes off. And then cut number 2 is the back one. That one comes off. Like that. Come off the top. Now the only really critical part of this bandsaw to me is what happens up here by the joints. Right? That's I'm gonna keep stressing this part. This becomes the more important part of this. So when I bandsaw this, the joints have been fit. I mark where the rail is, the face of the rail is, and also I want to make sure that it's going to be really important to me that when this leg gets shaped to that inside corner is produced by the bottom of the rail, and that line has to flow around the corner of this block. So I bandsaw heavy here, and I bandsaw heavy on the knee by about 1/16 of an inch. So I have plenty of wood to bring it down to the faces, and that's what's going around when you're looking at the corner of that chair. Everything is heavy to find the corner, because we want that line to end up straight. We don't want this thing to dip up or down or have any type of issue. If you go below that corner, it's not good.
Is that when the embellishments come in?
So I saw these out. I have to saw out the other shape. I tape these back on. Some people leave a bridge down in here so they don't have to tape it on, but I basically tape it all back on. And then I bandsaw the same patterns out in the other way. Right, so I bandsaw my second set of shapes. So this one comes off of here, maybe. Right, this one comes off of here. And then you got a leg. And that's a compound curve shape. And the flow lines are much better on that. See that on both sides? Much better blank for that. See how the flow lines go right up and they look like they curve? It just naturally happens because of the selection of wood. It's a better blank for that. All right.
just because the grain is diagonal?
Yeah, because it really comes through at that diagonal 45 on both of those faces nicely. Yeah. So, you don't always have the choice, but if you're actually at the lumberyard, I'll choose through as many boards as I have to try to get that the best that I can. So, and all of this is just waste. If you have a problem with scraps, you can throw them away. It's okay. Holding these, everybody has different ways of holding these. I like to have things supported. I learned just using a regular clamp in the vise. It's fine. I put it in here with a couple of pads so I can have this supported in here. And you can basically open this up and clamp that down. And it's nice to work on. I've had this situation. I can put it up on the bench. I can grab it with wooden hand screw clamps, which are behind that board, and I can clamp it down to the bench to get it up a little higher. I've actually put it in here. I've done different things. I came up with this. I had to do a demonstration at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. They didn't have a bench. They were going to put me on a table, and I had no clamp. So I basically just came up with this block of wood that I could put this on the table. I could clamp this to the table, and I could plop this in there. Like that, and I could work. It's not quite as nice. I get a little bit of the teeter, but it's still pretty good. And I think I'm going to do this just because it's going to be easier for everybody to see. I think if I was doing this normally, I would probably use this setup in my regular record vise, just because it's smaller. It's just a little narrower than the big longer vise. So, all right, so we're going to do that.
What wood do you typically use? Mahogany or
It depends on what depends on the project. Traditionally, these chairs were done a lot in walnut. Some later on were done in mahogany, but walnut cherry pretty typical. Normally, it's whatever the client kind of specifies too. So,
where do you get your wood?
this wood came from a graduate of ours. His name's David Hancock, Hancock Forest Products. He's down in Connecticut. He's a really great resource. He does wholesale some lumber, but he cuts. He primarily saws his own wood and dries his own wood. So he's really good for cherry, walnut, maple, figured maples, things like that. Wide slabs, things like Hancock Forest Products in Thompson, Connecticut. But then I go to Highland, I go to Northland. If it's more of a specialized project, I'll order from Marion Lumber, sometimes for wide mahogany, thick mahogany. All right, so what I need to do, like when we talked about the post, right, fairing the post, I need to fair the leg. So this is not bad off the bandsaw. It's pretty decent, but I don't want to start shaping it. It's not perfect. So it has some hips and dips and valleys and whatnot. But if you look at this, what I was talking about, we're going to spoke shave this and rasp this, and we're going to treat it as if it's just a flat surface. So we're refining the pattern that we saw now in both views. So we're refining the pattern view. And as I do that, I'm going to look for how smooth it is, how fair it is. If I run my hand on this, I can feel it. It goes dip, dip, dip from the bandsaw. But also, if I thought this was good, and I thought this surface was good, when those two surfaces actually come together at the corner, right, it makes a minor corner, gives you a corner. When you look at that, you sight that, you can see it. And if it's actually two good, straight, flat surfaces, it'll just be a straight line right down the whole leg. If it has a bump or a dip in it, if it actually bumps over this way, it tells me if there's a hump here or a dip here. It'll tell me where the imperfection is. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to shape these up. So I'll do two surfaces so you can see it, and then I'll leave the other two kind of rough. We'll let it go around, and then we'll keep going. So I use spoke shave and rasp quite a bit for this. And I don't do too much. I can do a little bit up here, but I'm not going to do too much. I want to focus on that later. So I didn't tell you to turn that foot right on the lathe. So I talked about that. If you don't have a lathe, you don't turn. Go back to the old fine woodworking. Still load as an article of how to shape a patchwork without a lathe. Actually, I think I have one of his legs up there that's done that way. Okay, so down here, it's not worth getting in there with the spoke shave. It's not. So I'm just going to pick up the rasp. I don't want to hit the pad. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to expose. So what happens is when we turn this on the lathe, I'm going to go to the board real quick just to show you. When we turn this on the lathe, the process is pretty quick. The shape isn't so much, the shape's the visual, but the actual intersection is more important. So what happens is you have a pattern. Your pattern is going to look something like, something like this, right? And it's going to have a little skew cut on it, and a little bevel on it like that. What happens when we make the cabriolet, the leg comes off of that foot. So when we're on the lathe, what we do is basically we lay out the height of the pad, whole foot. We basically make it a cylinder, and then we part it in to create the foot, this part here, and then we round. And that's how it looks nice there and there. And then the last thing I do, is this part of it is still square, right? This is round. You take your skew, put your skew in there, and the skew looks like that. It's like 30 degrees. And basically, when you part this in, it gives you that little bevel. That little bevel is the toe of the foot. So that's important. From the lathe, it gives me where that transition point is going to be. And it's a mechanical. Some on the old chairs, you'll see some are really, really deep, and you see some that are super shallow. They're just scribe lines as a line to find it. If you didn't have a point to land it, it's hard to get that line to look nice and straight around the curve. So I like it a little bit more bold because it makes it easy to find that toe.
When some people use an offset when they turn that side over.
On the cabrio legs like this, traditionally, most of them are an offset. They look like they are because it's how they're sawn out in the blend. If they offset them, what happens is this pad gets smaller, and it makes the curve look a little curvier. What happens, and again, I should have talked about this with the pattern. Usually, the biggest mistake a lot of people make in the beginning when they do cabrio legs of curved work like this, compound curved work, the pattern is a lot flatter than the shape they imagine a cabrio leg looks like. They expect it to be a really extreme curve, and that's true. When you look at this leg, you look at it straight on, it's pretty flat. It's nice. But when you look at it diagonally, like look at that table over there. When you look at it diagonally, it's really, really curvy, right? The legs are really S-shaped. And most people imagine that that's the shape that they want, and they create their pattern to that shape. And if you saw that leg out, it looks comical. It almost looks like a cartoon. It's weird. It's way over. And usually if they do that, they have to offset that pad. I mean, I'm not saying there aren't ones that are probably like that, but a lot of them, they're exactly on center, and then the maximum size of the blank is really difficult.
So the first thing you do is the weight before you do anything else?
Yep. Yeah, so it's a big square. I cut my mortises, all my joints are fit, and then I just turn that foot at the bottom. All right, so we do a little of this. So again, that's what I was just talking about. So that small little bevel I did was just to expose that little skew line at the toe. That's the toe. So now I'm going to use the rasp and just rasp that right down here. If you're not too chicken on the bandsaw, you can get close to this. If you're chicken, it's a lot of rasping to do. You don't want to hit that toe. That was a little heavy. Feel that? Feels pretty good. Do the other face. Same thing. My favorite tool is the stove shake. So I'm just exposing that skew line. Yeah. Marking that line, what it does, it gets the wood away from the toe, so I'm less likely to hit it. And it shows me how much thickness is there. I'll take that out at later, Ken. I look at this, it's pretty good, and then it has a little bit of a wiggle right there. You can see it right on that line. It's really straight down here. It's really good. Right here.
Dan, do you find that the Nicholson rasp leaves good surfaces, the Oreo, or vice versa?
I don't have a lot of experience with it with the other rasps. I've always used the Nicholson, but probably not. I bet you it's a little coarser surface. That would be my guess. So what I'm doing, like I said, I'm working that head a little bit of what I thought was a dip on this side.
Do you ever mark it with a pencil?
I could. If I had a lot of them, I would. But what I'm doing, when I'm putting it back in the vise, I'm leaving my fingers where that issue is. Right there. See my thumb's right there? That's where I want to take that off of.
Yeah.
Anyways, I'm not gonna fuss it. If you want to look, you'll see a little hump right there. But I want you to look at the back one because you'll see how wavy it is. I want you to kind of give it a quick feel and get that around as quick as we can. But I'm going to do the same thing on the back surfaces. All four surfaces are going to be faired, right? So they're true, and then we're going to lay out the shaping lines. What's going to happen on this particular leg is this leg is round at the ankle, and so it has to go from fully round, so it's a square shape in section when we're done fairing it. It becomes fully round, and it has to flare to meet a round circle at the bottom. So it has to make a transition from smaller round to bigger round. But then it has to make a transition from a round shape up to a rounded corner, right? So these are flat at the top. Right? So you have this ever-changing shape. So it's round, and as you go up, imagine it's just a square with some rounded corners. It just gets bigger as it goes up the shape. So these are just square in section with some sort. And the easiest way to do it, a lot of them will actually taper. Sometimes they're not the same amount of rounding from leg to leg. On the ones with balloon seats, they're slightly different. This particular chair, this quarter round that happens down there to create the circle is the same all the way up. It's the easiest, most consistent way to do it. And that's what we're going to do. And we're going to start our layout from the circle. Right? That's where we're going to generate our dimensions to lay this out. So, and again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take and draw those lines on there. We're going to chisel, spoke shave, rasp. We're going to create the shape. It's going to basically peter out roughly to this corner because this edge is going to end up as a square corner, so the round has to be able to taper out. It's got to be able to taper out here because this is going to taper to a square corner, or a corner, not square, but an actual corner. The same thing in the back. It has to be able to taper back out and to the blank. So it's very consistent from the ankle to about there. If you cut it just below the knee, the quarter round is the same. It's like you ran a router on each one. Let's see. So if you look at that skew mark basically goes away in the front. That's where the toe is. That's what we're just talking about. But you can still see that little shelf in the back.
And that's undercut a little bit on the above the
Here?
foot. Yeah.
Well, the pattern comes in and lands at the bottom of that skew mark. So yeah, I guess technically it could be undercut. So, get that out of the way.
Do you have any secrets as to how you set up your smoke shapes so you get such a nice... It's a very fine
It depends on what I'm doing. Like this, where I want a pretty consistent cut across the width because I'm trying to create a flat surface, I just have it perfectly even across. A lot of the times, if I'm doing a lot of just shaping work, and it's not so much trying to create a flat surface, I'll actually have one side that's deeper than the other side. So I can have multiple cuts. I can have a heavy cut and a light cut in the same stroke. You know, so I'll actually have one side as my roughing side and the other side as my finished side. But for this, I like it just flat. So
When you say steeper cut, you mean expose more blade?
expose more blade on one corner. Yeah. So yeah, I don't have a trick other than just
hone it?
hone it sharp and try it out. And I don't ease any corners or anything.
You hand hone it?
I do. Yeah, I just all of my cutting edge tools outside of the carving tools now. I do have a Tormac for the carving tools. I use a bench grinder and a hand hone, either oil or water. I learned on oil, but I use water stones a lot now.
Is it a hot blade or anything?
Nope, this is just
Standard Stanley steel?
This is a Stanley. It's probably a sweetheart iron. I tend to look for the sweetheart. It is a sweetheart, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to this. It's a 151M, the malleable. So it's supposedly we drop it on concrete, it won't break. I had one. I had a regular 151, and at school we had concrete floors. I dropped it, broke. So I found a 151M. I take to school when I do the shaping too. I'd like to come back. So the next, like I said, I'll do the other two back surfaces as I would around. Did you see the line?
Yeah.
How it waves?
Yeah, especially at the rough side.
Especially on the rough side. Right.
Some designs actually keep that triangular edge when it came to that just.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
There are some legs, especially like the slipper foot, the different type of foot, usually has kind of a square corner. They can be rounded, but usually have a lot flatter, broader surfaces. So you'll see cabriole legs that are just this pattern, and that's it. No, you might ease the corner a little bit. Let me do the back quickly, just so we can do some shaping, which is more of the fun part. Too much up to the top part of that, because that's going to go into the transition block later. That's stuff going to be ferried in later on, so we're not going to chase it too far up at this point. It's unnecessary. Get this off of your stove, you can rasp the whole entire thing. Yeah, you could rasp and card scrape this if you needed to. So let's see. Looking at that back shape. Not bad, it's pretty straight. There's a little bump there. Again, for the sake of time, we're not going to. And also this curve, right? We're not going to that. The curve's pretty nice. That one's coming pretty good. That one's not bad. Right. So it's reasonable. I think we can do the next step from there. All right, so rounding, shaping. It's square in section. We're trying to make it a circle on the square. Right. Let me just go to the whiteboard quick to give you a quick synopsis on this. And here, a few ways to think about this. Really, what we're going to do is we drew the ankle. This is the square section of the ankle. And some crosshairs on this. And we're going to try to make a circle inside of that square. So really what I'm trying to do is this, right? Trying to make this thing look round. Not like that. Not actually. Circle and square. What I want to do is I want to systematically be able to break this down and make the cuts. Not just for the accuracy of it, but for if you're doing multiples, you get all that repetition. And if you have a good process to do the repetition, no matter from 1 to 12, if you're making all those legs, they can look the same. So what we do is if I know that this is my square, what I'm looking to do is I'm trying to find ways to put layout lines on the surface and make some cuts. Just like those chamfer cuts that I did on the post, I can do chamfer cuts on the legs. What I'm going to do is, without going too deep into this, we call this, from the North Bennett world, we call this the 5-7 rule. If you're interested, Will Neptune wrote an article for the Southern Journal 1 year about the 5-7 rule, the mathematics behind it. But basically what it is it's a way to break the square down to a circle. If you imagine that, and it doesn't matter the size of the scale, right? Our blank is what, a 1-inch square roughly at that point? This thing could be 2 feet. It doesn't matter how big it is for this process. What we think about is the square is, we call it 24 units, right? It doesn't matter what your units are. It could be inches, it could be 30 seconds, it could be donuts, it doesn't matter what it is. And what we're doing is we're breaking it down into quadrants. So each quadrant is 12. So 12 by 12. And what that helps us, what we call 5-7, is to put our layout lines for our first chamfer. What we're trying to do is we're trying to find that cut with the chisel. That's what I want to do, because that's going to help me find that part of the circle. Once I find that, it's easy. It's all downhill. So what this does is if you break this to 12, no matter what this size is, if you break this up into 7 units and 5 units, that gives you what we call a primary chamfer cut. That primary chamfer finds you the outside of that circle. I did an article for Fine Woodworking. I don't know when it was. It was a 400 top T-table article that I had done from there that we talk about this process too. So what I'm going to do is that center bullseye, right? The center points is those are what we call shape tube lines. We're going to shape, that's where we want to bring the shape up to. So I'm going to use my really accurate finger gauge and find the center. Eyeball the center. It's right about there. Take that, and I'm going to bring that right up the leg, right down the leg. Roll it, same thing, center, right down the leg, right up the leg. Here, I turned that away, so I can't really get that there now. Up. So it spins right to the foot. Okay, I have each corner gets a line, so it goes down.
Is there a tool to use if you don't have calibrated fingers?
Your finger. That's what you want to learn, how to use your finger. What happens with a curve work is a lot of times you can't get anything in there, and this is really the best way. If you want, you can set a compass, but you've got to keep the compass perpendicular to the curve. And this is just good practice. So those are shape 2 lines. Those are the center points of the circle. Right? Now I want those to fare out or peter out. So we do this in a way, maybe you can see it. I'm going to take that line that I brought up there, and I'm going to let it fare to the corner. What I'll do on this leg is I'll only do like one corner of each so you can see the layout and all that stuff later on. So that's going to fare to that point. This one's going to come up to that point. This one's going to come there. One in the back. That's all those lines that I did there, those stay. Those lines are this point and this point, all the way around the back. Now this is where that 5/7 comes. And when I was doing the article for Fine Woodworking, I wrote it, and they said, we have an issue with the writing. I said, well, obviously I'm not a very good writer, so I said, you say you eyeball the 5/7, but what's that measurement? It doesn't matter. Eyeball. It's such a small scale. Really what we're looking to do is it's pretty easy to visualize center, right? I got that center pretty good if you measured it. If I look between now this point and this point and I say, okay, I can visually find the middle pretty good. And if I imagine that this whole thing is 12 units, we talked about units, right? This is 12, so that's 6. If I'm trying to get 7 and 5, all I have to do is bump my finger over just a little bit visually, pick up one more unit. That's my 5/7. So see how that ratio is slightly different there. So now I'm going to take that and I'm going to bring it up and down each corner, just like I did before, of each leg, of each corner of the leg. When I do multiple legs, if I was doing 2 legs for a chair or a whole set of chairs, I do all the same stage on all the legs all the way through. I would bandsaw all the legs, I would fair all the legs, I would lay out all the legs. Just for consistency, my eye and my brain are in that process, and I'm going to be the most consistent if I do them all at the same time. So I would much rather, like I said, take the time, even on a set of, whatever, 8 or 12 chairs. Just do them all now. Harder to see in the walnut. I actually wish this was something lighter so you can see a little bit better, instead of just bringing those up to the same corner, just bearing those to the same point. So each corner has 2 sets of lines, right? 5/7 lines, those are our primary chamfer lines, and 2 center lines that are shape 2 lines. So now, get in here and do what Phil used to call shoveling. When it's chiseled. Change right here. So again, if you can get it nicely off your edge tool, get it off the edge tool chisel. You could always pick up the spoke shape and refine it if that's better for you. Or if you didn't like that at all, you could use the rasp. You can use anything. It doesn't really matter.
So let me ask you just a quick question.
Yep.
So why are we working so hard to flatten it all 4 sides right away if we're just going to go back down and pare it down?
Because that corner, if you don't fair both sides, that corner's doing this. So your layout lines are going to follow that rough shape. So it's to true up the shape. So I'm just going to spin this. It's easier for me to not go over there. Come on down here. So
Having a one piece of lumber almost. You don't get the curve right.
So again, I'm just going to expose that toe, just like I did when I was doing the rasp mark. Right? There's my toe right there. What that does is it gives me flat. Once I take that wood off of there, I need to have this flare down to that point. So we're going to take this and spin that guy down. So this setup might not like this quite as much, but rest on that guy. So I'm going to spend a little bit more time to make that flare happen to connect that toe. Do a side one. Grain change right there. Usually I expect it down a little further. This grain's running up, so I'm just going to stop right there. If your chisel gets stuck, the wood's trying to tell you something pretty quick.
So at this point, you're just connecting the 2 5 lines.
Just
right
connecting
there.
the dots. Yeah. Yeah, what's the greatest part about this stuff is everything we're doing for quite a while is just flat. Right? We're not even concerned about any type of round shape. Just use my mallet because I can't get up. It's also a little higher than I'm used to here. So. Really careful with this toe. Expose that toe. So the challenging thing about the side as we keep moving along here is think about it. It goes from an inside curve to an outside curve here, and then it becomes from an outside curve to an inside curve here. And it has to make a transition to the bolt on the corner. So it's kind of a fussy little space there. That's good enough, I guess, for what we're doing. Let's see if that's the... Let me do the back. I'll leave the other corner with the just laid out so you can see it. Let me just do the back one a little bit. And this is a point too. If you once you saw this out, where you removed a lot of material, this is flexible. Clamps are really powerful. If I tighten this too much, I can actually break this. I can actually crack the leg right there. So I need enough pressure to hold it, but I'm not going to ream down on this thing. I actually flex this so much and break it. So just kind of a food for thought.
If you were doing a ball and claw foot,
Yep.
on a cabriolet,
Yep.
would you go through this process first before you started covering the foot?
So when I do it, when I teach it, I shape the whole leg and then treat the foot
Yeah,
differently.
okay.
Normally, I do all this chamfer work. These lines flow right into the feet. It's all part. So when I'm chamfering this, I'm chamfering the toes and everything in one shot. It's all related. So stop cut right here because of that grain change, right? Already looking like something. They're already looking kind of round. Actually, let's pass that quick, and I'll draw a little bit while we do that. So, what we just did was colors here. So we just made a cut in our wood like that, right? So if we go off of our numbers, like I said, the numbers are kind of irrelevant other than just kind of thinking about it spatially. So this was a center line, right? This was a center line, our shape two lines. And what we just did with that chamfer is find the outside point of the circle. So the center line on that chamfer we just did stays there. It is now a shape two line. I don't want to cut that wood away because that's part of the circle. It's part of the shape I'm trying to create. So my next two cuts are going to be flat cuts again. They're going to be chamfer cuts. And what I'm going to do is so you lay this thing out, and we had 7 and 5. We cut away the 7s, so we're left with what? 5 and 5, right? 5 and 5. But it makes this section, what? 10. And when we did this cut, we just created a section that is 10. We just made an octagon. That's what we did in the circle. So if this is 5, now this is 5, this is 5. We're just going to divide things in half. So 5, 7 for me is only that first cut. If you only use halfsies, if you went 6 and 6 on this thing, you don't get far enough in to find the real tangent point of the curve. You'll actually have a little bit of an egg shape. So what I'm going to do now is we're just visually going to connect the dots. Let me do it at different colors. So basically we're going to say the center line stays, and we're going to connect, take that wood away, now, everything we're doing is a flat cut in a sequence so that we can repeat leg to leg, keep the shapes the same. So this is what we call secondary chamfer. So the first cut was a primary chamfer. Second series of cuts are secondary chamfers. Okay. After we do that, the leg is really pretty round. We have 3 flats on each corner. That basically gives you a pretty round shape. Then from there, it's just knocking the bumps off. But depending on the scale, I drew this out a long time ago just because I wanted to prove to myself how close this was. And this scale, I can't even measure how close that cut is to that circle. I drew it out as a 2-foot square, and it missed that chamfer, that being 2 feet, this being 1 foot, this being 7 inches, and this being 5 inches. It misses that by about a 64th of an inch in 2 feet. So in a 1-inch square, how close are we? I'm not a math guy. I'm sure somebody here could probably do the math and figure it out. But, it's really close. It's really a nice process to do this. All right, I'm going to get a sip of water while that goes around. Any questions while that's going around?
How long would it take? Like, it's a long process. I was just wondering how long.
Not that long. I bet you this leg without talking about it, that could probably go 45 minutes, so maybe less than 45 minutes.
Including the turning, everything?
Yeah, it doesn't take long.
I think the early versions of this were using, break down at 50-50 as opposed to 5 and 7. Way back in Woodworkers.
Yeah, so like when the early versions when Phil used to write about
Yeah.
this stuff early on, it was 50-50. And that's something he had learned from George Fullerton, who was the instructor at that point. That was just, they would eyeball it pretty good, get it about 50-50 and shape it till they liked it. And Will was the one that thought about it and like, okay, let's think about the actual geometry of it. It just taking a little bit more off in that first cut, shave some time off the final shape. It's just another variation about that. Actually, while that's going, let me see if I have that Phil's leg with the shaped foot. So this is the non-lathe spoon foot that Phil did in his article way back when. So that's shaped without turning.
So what do you use, a router?
Huh? No, just exactly what we're doing. Just shaped it. There's an article on that Woodworking. All right, that's back. So, going to put on some. So, at some point early on, when you're doing this first time, you need every guideline you can get. Right? You want to have something to cut through. The more lines you put on there, the harder it gets to see. It becomes smaller and smaller. What I do in my own work at this point is I definitely put the center line on there. Right? I don't want to cut the center line of that chamfer away. That is now the outside of the circle. So that stays. And that does not go away. Same thing. It's not a big That's the Then, if I wanted to put lines on here, I would have to, like I said, I have a shape 2 line, center line, a shape 2 line, center line on my chamfer. Now I'm dividing things in half, so there would be a line here and a line here. It takes that corner away. I'm going to draw them on the front. I'll draw them on both the fronts, and I'll only cut one so you can see them in comparison. It just becomes a lot of lines, and you can make the cut, and you can kind of visualize what's going on there without having to have the lines on there once you've done it a few times. So years ago, I don't know if anybody's a bolt builder here or anyone knows anything about that, but a bolt builder in one of my classes had said that in shipbuilding, that the mast makers used to use what they call the 7-17 rule, which is basically 5-7 in a 2-foot scale. So the 2-foot rule, if you mark 7 and 17, it would give you a 5-7 ratio on a 2-foot square. I don't know if it's true or not, it's 100%. So I put the lines on the front, both sides. I'll do one cut. The other ones, I'm just going to do what I normally do and just eyeball it. Okay? So I'm going to only cut one of those. I'll cut this side here so you can see it. This.
Do most of that with shovel than the last.
Yeah, you can do it with whatever you want. If I don't have to use the rasp, I don't, just because I don't want to have to get rid of the rasp marks, right? But I could use the spoke shape just as easily here.
And a card scraper?
And then a card scraper. Yep. Yeah, basically we're going to make, like I said, we're going to make a whole bunch of flat cuts. And then we're going to do a final rounding with spoke shave and the card scraper. So here at the toe, I'm going to do the same thing. I have that transition of the same flat that has to flare out to the bigger circle. So I've got to do the same thing here. I need to create that toe location. I'm going to do the same thing we did before, just chamfer off that little bit of extra wood at the toe. If you do this incrementally, you're basically working your way around pretty systematically much easier with the rasp in this part, though. Without going too far.
Sharpen and rasp?
Hmm?
Do the sharpen and rasp?
I-
Or is it always forever?
You can, they will wear out. There are companies that can sharpen. It's a chemical bath. You send them to them, they sharpen them, they soak them. It basically eats away the metal, runs away the metal, give you a fresh tip. It's not something that I would know how to sharpen. All right, so that's just the one corner I did there.
Yeah?
Yeah,
Boggs in California does that. They do
Boggs?
a very good job. You send them a pile and they do
Yeah.
it by weight.
oh, cool.
And they come back better than
I've never had it done.
They actually feel sharper than when you first purchased the file.
Really?
Do you like a hand stitch rasp, or does it have to be a...
Any kind of rasp.
Yeah, huh.
One of the guys in the guild, Peter Roy, I think, wrote an article in a past issue. I think he used, I don't know, muriatic acid.
Yeah, this
Oh,
it's
really?
nothing like their process. I've used that too. Because of how many years.
It's vinegar. Yeah.
So I'm just doing the secondary chambers here on the side without doing the layout, because again, I want to show you the transition blocks. To me, that's the part other people will show you how to do.
Dan, because of your experience, do you feel very comfortable after you use the quad scraper that it's a flat, smooth surface?
I feel it's a pretty nice surface, but I would definitely sand.
Oh, okay.
Oh, definitely sand.
I was going to say, do you ever use like mineral spirits just to check to
Just to
see if there's any
Yep.
undulations or things that you don't see when it's dry? Or you really
Yeah, I use mineral spirits actually when I check carvings and stuff, like backgrounds of carvings when I'm trying to find little facets and digs and stuff. And on this, I probably don't as much, but you could. Let me do the back corner here a little bit, right, that transition corner. And then, like I said, we can kind of stop at that point and show you what's going on. So this is that weird little transition from outside curve to inside curve. Still the same secondary chamfer that's going on. At this point, it's so close to that corner, I'm not going to use the rasp. I'm going to use a finer file. You could use a cabinet maker's file or a little type of riffler file, whatever that you like. That transition. Something a little bit more gentle than the rasp. Help me get. Carry this one leg. I didn't go all the way up yet. I guess I did put it there. I didn't do it here. Okay. So now, like I said, I've got the three chamfers. It's pretty round. So I'm going to pass this one around because it shows that corner that's rounded. That's what I'm going to do right now. You'll see the primary chamfers and secondary chamfer layouts. I'm just going to spoke shave this corner around a little bit. We'll do a little fairing up above just to finish this process, and then I can do some transition blocks. So then now, I'm just going to go around. What I'm doing is I'm still being systematic. I'm not just whittling. I have these corners right here and here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit that corner, that corner, that corner, that corner, then I'm going to round. Right? So I'm still kind of thinking about flats. So you took it, and I don't know terminology, you could help me, but you took an octagon and made an octagon into a 16-sided agon, and then you made it a 32 agon, and then all of those things. knock the bumps off first. And then I'll do a little bit of fanning. Just going to fan it around. Do this corner with the other one I shaped.
Just removing all the facets.
Just taking the facets off. Trying to make it look relatively nice. Obviously, I could file and fair all that a little bit further. That's basically the shaping of the leg. Do that all the way around, get that pretty nice. I would scrape, I would sand, I would do all of my prep work as much as I could, so it's done basically to this point. I don't want to have to go back here later, maybe a little sanding later. I would usually sand this maybe to 180, because I'm going to do my final sanding at 220. So it just gets all of that surface prep done now. I don't go to 220 because it is going to get dinged. I'm going to drop glue on it. I'm going to, it's still being worked on, so I don't take it all the way to finish at that point. All right, so we're imagining our leg is done, and we go to glue up our chair. Right, we have to start gluing this thing up, and what I would do is talk about it. So this portion's done. Let me get rid of some things. Let me move a couple of things. Give me 1 second. This. Some things. So we would have a nice, clean work surface. And what the first thing we would do is we would actually glue up the front rail assembly. So I'd have both legs would be shaped and fit. I would put this chair together. So that leg and rail would be there. And I'm going to glue these two front joints. Right? If you remember when we started talking about this in the beginning, we talked about the assembly. It's a front to back assembly. Back unit, front unit. Everything's put together. So what I want to do when I clamp this up, it's a weird thing to clamp, right? And I have through tenons, so right now, because these aren't wedged and trimmed off, these actually stick out a little bit. If I put a clamp on here to here, it's really easy to torque this thing around and keep it square. It's a really simple fixture we use. And I would have to put a couple of pads on there because of the tenons sticking out. But what I would do is put a couple of spacers on this, put this underneath, clamp that to the back rail. Now I can get a straight clamp from front to back. I can square the chair up really well.
Would a band clamp be any better for putting on consistent?
What I like about the regular bar clamps, and I use something with a little deeper reach, is it's easier for me to square the chair up, a diagonal. The band clamp would hold it in a good way. The individual clamps is if your trapezoid diagonally is out of square, you need to move it around. You have some adjustment with your clamps. What I also like about those clamps too, if you have clamping pressure and there's any blind to the chair, when you move clamps side to side, you adjust squareness. When you move clamps up and down, you adjust the line. So all of those things can be adjusted. So I would do, even though I'm gluing these two joints, I'm going to dry clamp the whole entire thing. And then I'm going to glue up the two front side rail joints. So it creates a corner unit. And what that gives me is it gives me this whole front assembly that I can work on. So I can do transition blocks. If this had knee carving, if it had anything else going on, I could do all of that work right now. What else was I going to say? There was other thought I had. I'll think about it. So this is a good way to think about it. And then when I do the final front to back blow up, when I want to actually wedge these joints, so I would flare these mortises. If you look at that other chair, it actually has it drawn on the side. I don't even think I've cleaned this thing out yet. It's got the layout to flare the mortises on it. So actually, it goes straight for a little bit, and the mortises are flared out, and those wedges are driven in, so it makes a dovetail shape at the end of it. Then you drive those wedges, and it flares that tenon. So all that work needs to be done. But when I do that, when I put the clamps on it front to back, I don't want the clamp. I can't use this because it's in the way of the clamp. So what I do is I actually take this and I clamp it to the front seat rail, and it stiffens the front seat rail. Then I can get a clamp from here to the back rail, pull those joints, and I can still wedge this joint up. So it's just ways to think about accessing of how to get around this thing as you're working. So I would have the two corners, right, would be glued. Then I need to fit the transition blocks. What does that mean? So we've cut them off. We have our orientation. And let's say these blocks were for this leg. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, which is the up, which is the down, inside corner. It is for that leg over there, but that's the orientation of how they came off when I cut the blank originally. The one closest to the leg is the closest in grain. It becomes my front block. And then this one becomes the side block. So it's just like any other woodworking. You go to match a tabletop. You want to do a slip joint sometimes. You want to slip it over so this thing is going to basically slip over and down. And this one's just going to slip over and down. That's what's going to happen. We're not rotating. We're not flipping. We're not doing anything weird. We're just going to take that, like I said. Make sure you have the right ones. This is the closest. Over and down. Over and down. So then, what I do is, while this is still a block, I cut these on the table saw. So it's got some saw marks in there. I'll actually hand plane that flat. Right? I get rid of the saw marks. So I have a nice flat surface. So it's a nice tight joint. And then I need to fit it. I'm assuming that the joints are pretty square and all that stuff, but I am human. So that might not be perfect by the time I'm done, but what I do is, like I said, I hand plane the top so it's flat. And then I put the block in there and I see how it fits. If it doesn't fit, if this teeters around or anything like that, I don't want to plan the end grain again. That's a pain to get nice, right? I can hand plane the long grain until that fits tight. Once that fits tight, then I can think about sawing out the shape. So then what I do is I take a pattern for the transition block. And if this was my block, let's see, this is the side one, this is the front one, this comes over and down. Let's say it fits tight, let's say I've already hand planed that. This pattern's going to go on there and I'm going to trace that pattern on. So it gets bandsawn in two views, but with two different shapes. So we get the pattern of the transition, this shape. And also, I can put this on here and I can scribe the knee. That's the other shape. So if you look at this, I'll pass this block around, pattern shape, knee shape. So you have this one and the side one will be slightly different. When I go to the bandsaw, this is from one of them. I don't know which one it was. It was front. Okay. So we bandsaw the pattern view first, which gives us that shape in the back, that shape, and then we bandsaw off the knee, and it gives us that shape in the front. So those two blocks come off of it. That's the pattern view one, and that's the one from the knee, how it comes off of there. So that's what's removed, and that's what we're left with. So I fit those on, I glue those on, I use the bed springs like we were talking about. If you needed to, you can use a regular clamp for that too. You can clamp them up in there. But now, this, I don't have to have this leg on here, so I won't. Now we're going to start worrying about making this thing. Let's see how we're going to do this one in this setup. Let's just do it right as we can.
Yeah?
Yep.
The pinch marks from the clamps, do you use water to bring those up if they're...
No, usually they get shaped away. If they're too deep, you could hit a little bit of water, try to swell it back out a little bit. So I'm going to make this thing flush to the post flush to the rail first. If you have a lot of wood on there, you could can chisel it off first. If you needed to, I like the shoulder plane for this. I'm gonna. I'm going to take a little off with the chisel first, just because I don't want to have you watch me shoulder plane this whole thing.
You like the tail knife?
I do. I like the tail knives a lot.
Gets a lot of criticism.
Mm-hmm.
Gets a lot of criticism in some.
It all depends on
Sure, she criticizes the hell out of it.
depends on what kind of woodwork you do and how you work, how you plan. Actually, I like it a lot because what it does, it holds really nice, and you can work out with things coming towards you.
Yeah.
So if you're shaping spindles, things like that, you don't have a shave force, you can work a little shave force. Put the shoulder plane on there, like that. The shoulder plane wants to cut flat, and it's trying to get, so if this wood is higher than this wood, it should only take that material off of there. So, I don't know if this is set or not. Let's see if that goes. No, because I'm taking that whole other side off. All of this material is going to come off on the side too. So nope. We'll make it 15 minutes. How long does it take to do this? So I will check it with a straight edge. But I'll take a straight edge and make sure I'm not ramping down like that. I can still see I'm still higher up and just trying to get it flat.
You're not concerned about tear off on the corner?
No, that whole other side's going to be taken down.
All right.
So let's tear out. If I do this, it would help the tear out, but I have no guide. Right? I'm just freeballing all the way back in there, so it's harder to see. I'd much rather care about getting the reference good. Getting close. Just getting a little closer to the top of the leg here. So if you're doing cabriolets with a curved corner, could be a footstool or like the balloon seat type of thing. This line has to carry around the curved corner. It's a pretty good challenge. Get those things to line up the way you want them to. I'm going to lighten this just a little bit because I'm getting closer. Pretty close. Flush and flat. Now I can do the same thing. What we talked about earlier, the bottom of that rail sets that line. Right? Top of that transition block, this line was to flow around. The transition block gives me a reference, just like the rail gave me a reference on surface. So if I take the shoulder plane, lay it down, I can do the same thing. I can find the top of the leg, the intersection point of the post, from the transition block. So nice way to work out this guy. here's where it's easy to get carried away and do this. Right? You actually tip it down. So really, I want to do a little, check the shelf for fall. As you look at cabriole legs, there's all different types of transition blocks. These are the under the rail transition blocks. There's ones where the rails are wider and there's smaller blocks that are over the rail. There's ones that the transitions are just carved into the legs themselves. There's all kinds of different things you'll see depending on the style. That's basically pretty much the top. There's a little bit of glue there, that's what I'm feeling. That gives me a really nice straight line, hard inside corner. Now this just has to look nice. This just has to be fair. So it's a nice fair shape, nice clean curve down to that corner. So I've seen people do all the seen people do spoke shaves, rafts, files, shoulder plane. I like to do most of it with a chisel. I have another long chisel I like. It just gets the handle out of the way. It doesn't have to be super long, but I just like it because I can wear this stuff off. And I have to take this shape. Now, all of this, remember, the top of this leg was never faired like the rest of the leg for the shape. Right? I never took this all the way up to, because I didn't know where that corner was. Now I know where that corner is. Now we're going to try to make that as nice as we can. Risk it's hitting that finished surface. Right? That's why I'm not coming down like this. I don't want to stab into it. Some people put tape there to help give them a little bit of a buffer. I've seen people put a little bit of cardboard there and tape it down for a while as they're working. Basically, you just don't hit it. That's why I kind of go diagonal with it when I'm working down to get close. Usually people get afraid here, and they have it curved down really nice, and then they go real quick, and it just looks like a big, weird, square, rounded shelf. I want that to look like it just came right out of that corner.
Helps that the tool razor sharp.
Yeah.
It can help. Yeah, if you're fighting the tools, your work's not going to come out that great. It's telling me something. So again, that last little bit, if you're sensitive about getting up there with the chisel, pick up the plane. Right? I could do that. I can get in there a little closer with the shoulder plane. I don't worry too much about tear out here. I haven't cleaned this up. So again, I don't do unnecessary work until later because I'd rather give myself a little bit of a buffer just in case I made a mistake. If I slipped off of here and had a big chip come on, I could glue it back in and not affect anything. Right? But at the end of this, you could do that last little bit. Shoulder blade. I have a hard time doing it this way here. So. especially wood up here that I don't like. And again, I have some big facets up here that I could take it a little bit further. But again, for the gist of what we're trying to do right now, it's good enough. Like I said, I can fuss some of those facets more, right? Now on the side, it's the same thing, but this is trapezoidal. Right? So I have a little bit more wood to take. See how much more wood I got to take off there? But it's the same process. Let me do just that really quick. I got 5 minutes. We can do it. We can do it. We can do it. Let's do it like this, maybe. So do something like this. I want to find something to support that. Here, I would want to be a little bit more aggressive. So a lot of wood to get over there. Some of this with the saw. I'm just going to do some relief cuts so it's easier for the chisel to peel those off. Here, just so I don't chip out as bad. Coming back the other way. Start taking some of this off. Again, and get it close, and then I would pick up the shoulder plane again, right, refine that in. Same thing here, like the knee, right, I just, on the front where it was straight, I just got these flush. Now I have to get this transition block and this knee have to be parallel to this trapezoid before I even start that shaping. So, just, again, I'm going to take the chisel, look like this. It's parallel to that. What that does is it changes the orientation of the blank. So now, I'll leave it at that so you can see what's going on. But see how I try to make those parallel to each other? So now the process is just the same. I had to make that correction so I could ferrule everything in. So now I would shoulder plane, find the corner, shape of the top of the leg. Any questions on that? It's easy, right? That's easy. And then from there, like I said, I would fair the transition block. Now it's cleanup work. And I would do as much cleanup work or carving. If there was shell, I would do all of that work. If I was carving this, if this had shells on it, I like it as a unit. I would do this work. One thing I really enjoy about this bench is I can put this here and I can clamp this. I can orientate a carving any way I want to. I can work that section, shape that section. Works pretty nicely. So.
How do you clamp that in there?
I would just take a couple of small, couple of these. I can grab have another one over here, or vice versa. Like now, now I can shave and work and scrape the sand, and carve, or whatever I want to do from there. So. But then, once that was all done, like I said, the final glue up would be the last two joints are the back joints, and those are the flaring and the wedging. And you can take a look at that really quickly here. You'll see it on the drawing, it'll be easier to see, but you can see it on this chair. I lay it out right on the side of the post, because I am going to show it to the camera. Because when I chop, I cut that with a chisel. So I have straight mortises that go through with the mortiser, and then when I flare it, I draw it on the outside, so when I chisel the angle, I have a guide. I have something to see. And then I make some wedges. I just take my chisel, so the tenons stick out about 1/8 of an inch. The mortises are flared. I take a 5/16 wide chisel, because they're a 5/16 thick tenon. Come down about 3/16 of an inch, and I give it a whack. I split the tenon, drive the wedge in, top and bottom. There's one there. And one there. Sometimes, if you wanted to be more decorative about it, more modern to it, you could do those in walnut or something, just to have a little bit of contrast in the wedges if you want to.
Do you always do through tenons on this chair?
Yeah, traditionally they're not all that way. Philadelphia chairs were that way. It actually is easier to do on machine, to cut all the way through, and it's stronger. So even if we're doing a Massachusetts style chairs, what we're doing with the Queen Anne we're actually using a Philadelphia chair construction.
Yeah?
Yeah.
When you split the tenons, have you ever drilled holes at the end so the split won't continue?
Nope.
As opposed to no?
If your tenon fits tight, top and bottom, you don't have any space there, it can't go anywhere. And what I like about the splitting over doing the socker, like people do the socker, you don't have to fill the socker. And I also think about it in a production manner, that if you had to socker all of it, it's just an extra step. And if you're picking really good straight grain, you're probably not going to have a running splitting problem. If you do have some run out, you have some really highly figured wood, like curly maple, that might run a little different, then I might actually socker it. It just makes it a little bit more gentle for it to spread. But typically I don't.
So you don't saw kerf it before you glue it up?
Nope.
Tenons. So how are you getting you're just chiseling in?
Take a chisel, give it a whack, split the thing up, just like...
After it's glued in?
After it's glued in. So you glue this whole thing up, I take my chisel, like I said, I actually just drive it in there, and I'll just take the chisel, you'll see it flex open. And I do top and bottom, I take both wedges, put them in there, just drive them in with glue, flush it off, and you're done.
How deep do you go?
It goes as deep as it needs to. So it depends on your flaring. Right? It depends on how much flare you have to it and how far it goes down. So let me just draw it really quick. I know we're running late, and I could talk about this stuff all day long. We draw it really big. So this is the post. Right? When we start, we cut a mortise like this, right? We fit a tenon, and I try to make this nice and snug, no space. Then we're going to lay out on there. We're going to come off of this. If this is where the rails are, rails like here and up here, because there's a rabbet for the seat, right? I come off of that shoulder about 3/16 of an inch. 3/16 of an inch. And at the end, when I flare the mortise, I come off of the end of this approximately a 16th. You don't need too much of a flare. 16th and 16th. And when I chisel the mortise, I'm connecting this point to that point. So you're leaving that part of the straight and flat tight. If you have space in there, you drive that wedge in, it could split, just like you were saying, it could split the rail. I don't want that to happen. But if this is tight, and then what I do is when we slide this together with glue, then I take, don't use the Sharpies. I come down off of the tenon, so my tenon's sticking out, right, about 1/8 of an inch. And I take my chisel, like I said, and I come down about 3/16 of an inch again. If you go less than that, you're kind of close to the edge. If you have any run out, it can split. If you go too much, the wood doesn't really want to move that much. It's too stiff, right? So I'm trying to find, so 3/16, I wouldn't go more than 1/4. I like 3/16. I take the chisel, I lay it right in there, right, and give it a whack, and it basically fractures the wood as far as it wants to with the chisel. Flex it open. And when you drive that wedge in there,
Flat side down against the
it
edge?
doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
It shouldn't matter. I think I do, I don't know if I have a preference. probably do both. Honestly, I don't know. Right? Now you drive that wedge in, and what happens is the wedge drives in, and it will only run as far as it can because it's held by that wood. If you saw curve, then the wedge has to fill the saw curve and then get the wood to move. And so it's just an extra step in some places. But I do, if I have grain that I know is running out a little bit, or I have figured woods, I will do the saw curve because it's a little safer. That's all I got.
Well, good. Thank you, Dan.
Yeah.